Hello, and thank you for joining me for this presentation on wildfire risk mitigation, specifically the fuel management prescriptions in Mount Richards in the municipality of North Cowichan. My name is Connor Corbett. I'm a forester and a wildfire specialist from Diamond Head Consulting, and I'm here to talk about the work that's been going on with these fuel management prescriptions, specifically in Mount Richards. So I'll start with a brief discussion of what fuel management is and how that pertains to what we're doing in Mount Richards. This is best viewed as a series of presentations that we've provided for wildfire risk mitigation in North Cowichan. And you should watch these in sequence because there's a lot more detail on the earlier ones. That being said, if you haven't watched those, we are still making an effort to make sure that this all makes sense. So a little bit of background. There's 4 different projects that are happening in 2021 that are being called wildfire mitigation in North Cowichan. And these are all separate but related projects. And we've been providing presentations on each of these projects to keep the public informed and keep communications open. The first project is Fire Smart Assessments for Critical Infrastructure. The second is the Wildfire Development Permit Area. The third is 3 separate fuel management prescriptions. And finally, we've prepared a communications and engagement strategy for all those projects. And the presentations are part of that communications and engagement strategy. And you will find different presentations for each of these subcomponents on the website we've prepared, northcowichan.ca/wildfire, and there'll be a link to that at the end of this presentation. And in 2020, a community wildfire protection plan was developed for North Cowichan. And within this strategic high-level wildfire plan, 3 areas of higher wildfire risk were identified. And these are on Mount Zuhalem, on Maple Mountain, and on Mount Richards. Each area is receiving its own individual wildfire fuel management prescription. And these fuel management prescriptions are being created to BC Wildfire Service standards. And so what is fuel management? Well, fuel management is a process in forestry to reduce wildfire risk in forests. And fuel management prescriptions are a critical part of that process because they outline the plan for how this fuel management is going to occur. And essentially, fuel management starts in a forest like this, where wildfire risk is identified as being high, and a fuel management prescription develops a plan to turn this high-risk forest into something that looks like this, a low-risk forest. And today I'm going to discuss how that fuel management prescription is created, what that fuel management prescription is, and what we're proposing within our Mount Richards fuel management prescription. It's best to understand a fuel management prescription by breaking down those 3 technical terms that make it up. So we'll start by discussing fuel. Fuel is the material that can burn in a wildfire. It's branches, trees, shrubs, moss, it's logs on the ground. And it's important to understand that most of our forests in BC have some tendency for natural wildfire, but the degree of flammability varies quite considerably in these forests. And the flammability is dependent on the composition and arrangement of the fuel in that forest. And so this is just a list of the characteristics we see in highly flammable forests in BC. And to keep us grounded in North Cowichan, I've highlighted in red the characteristics we see of the higher flammability forests in North Cowichan. So as I'm sure everyone who's watching this presentation knows, North Cowichan is a very forested community. And most of those forests are coniferous. So they're dominated by needle-bearing trees. And coniferous trees do tend to be quite a bit more flammable than deciduous trees. Secondly, because the community is so forested, there's a lot of continuity. The forests are very connected. And finally, we live in an area where the ecosystems are very productive. So there's a high volume of fuel available for wildfire. And wildfire risk is driven by fuel, terrain, weather, and location. We can modify fuel, but we can't modify terrain or weather or location. And management describes how we can manage that fuel, how we can change the composition and arrangement of a highly flammable forest to reduce the flammability. And while that sounds simple, it's very challenging because there's many different ways to do this, and there's many different ecologies that we're working in. So there's no one size fits all. And that's why we develop a prescription, which takes all the things that we know about fuel and fuel management and makes it site specific. And that is why we have to have different prescriptions, because they can account for the differences between different sites and different ecosystems. And within this prescription, which is a lengthy formal document, we lay out our objective, which is typically to reduce reduce the fuel flammability to a certain level, and importantly, detailed strategies for achieving that objective. And one of the important things to remember is that we don't want to eliminate risk completely, because that would involve eliminating the forest. We need to make sure we keep a functioning forest there, but it's just low risk. And in doing so, we have to incorporate the other important values in the area. So these can be recreational values, important biodiversity values, safety, public safety, aesthetics, etc. And so now that we have an understanding of a general understanding of what fuel management prescriptions are, we can talk about specifically what's happening in Mount Richards. So this is an area that was identified as higher wildfire risk. It's just west of Crofton, inside the Municipal Forest Reserve. So it's within land that is managed as part of the Municipal Forest Reserve. And part of the reason it was identified as wildfire risk is because it's very close to a fairly densely populated community or portion of the Municipal Forest Reserve, and it is adjacent critical infrastructure. So there's 2 water reservoirs in the northwest corner, and there's also a pump station in the north, just outside in the northeast corner. And this is a zoomed in look. And one thing you might notice right away is that we have had to stratify this into 2 different treatment units. And that's because these 2 different treatment units are dominated by slightly different forests. And I'm going to talk about each of those treatment units individually. But while we're looking at this high level plan, we can also see some of the sensitivities that we want to incorporate into our plan. Namely, in the northwest corner, there's a stream that runs through our prescription treatment area. And so we have to make sure we come up with some ways to protect this stream, make sure it's not damaged by our treatment. Also, another thing I'd like to highlight is that there is an existing road network, which is really great because it means that we can access the treatment area without having to build more roads. And there's also a wide variety of trails that can be used in the treatment implementation. So this is a photo I've taken of treatment unit 1. And this is about a 30-year-old regenerating forest that was clear cut probably in the 90s and then replanted. And one of the things you'll notice is that it's reasonably dense and it's very homogeneous. And there are patches of dead debris that are accumulating within this treatment area. So within the context of what we discussed about characteristics of highly flammable forests, we do see these here. There's a fairly high degree of horizontal and vertical continuity. This forest is dominated by Douglas fir, which is a coniferous tree. And there are accumulations of slash in this area that should be managed because they're increasing the wildfire risk. And so to summarize what we think should happen in treatment unit 1 is we need to thin the overstory trees to reduce that horizontal continuity. And the trees that we want to retain, we're going to prune to create a gap between the surface and the crown fuels. We also want to get rid of those debris accumulations that are also increasing the flammability. Finally, we do want this to be done with machinery because we have the roads and the trails there already, so it's easy for us to get our machines in. We have set out important thresholds to make sure that there isn't excessive disturbance or damage happening based on the machinery use. And finally, we want to make sure that debris is removed from the site because that will make sure that the wildfire risk is reduced by eliminating the fuel. Treatment unit 2 is located in the south of the treatment area, and it is a little bit different. This is also second growth, but it's quite a bit older. Whereas treatment unit 1 is about 30 years old, this treatment unit is about 100 years old. So the trees are a little bit more mature, and there's a lot more biodiversity here. There's cedar, there's hemlock, grand fir, and of course, Douglas fir. And in this area, we don't need to do quite as much of an intensive thin. We're going to focus on removing the dead and the understory trees. We are going to continue to prune the retained trees, but there's less pruning required. And altogether, there's less work required in this area. We do recommend that it's machinery-based, making use of the existing roads and trails that are present there, and of course, getting rid of the debris from the site. And to summarize how we kind of determined what we were going to do there, namely, we do want to make sure we're hitting those thresholds from the BC Wildfire Service. And that's to ensure crew safety, wildfire crew safety, in the event they have to go in there and suppress a fire. They want to make sure that the risk has been reduced sufficiently so that they can put their crews in there. And also to ensure our goals of public safety for protecting the critical infrastructure and the homes that are adjacent. And to determine that, we use software modeling based on the adjacent weather and under the peak conditions, because those are the conditions where we will be seeing most of the wildfires. And just to summarize, some of the sensitivities we've incorporated is the stream. So there's one stream in the northwest corner that I mentioned, and there's also another stream outside of the treatment area, but we have a little bit of an overlap with the protection area there. So we've incorporated that into our treatment unit. And finally, visual is also a common sensitivity here. The visual alteration will be very limited because we are making sure we're keeping most of the dominant upper canopy trees. This is mapped as a sensitive ecosystem. So we did work with a registered professional biologist to make sure that our treatment is not overly impacting the sensitivity of those ecosystems and that the ecosystem will continue to function both during and after treatment. And like I mentioned, roads and trails construction, no roads will be required for this treatment area. Some new trails will probably be required, or old trails will be kind of used again, but we have included criteria for making sure that those trails are minimal and also are rehabilitated after we're finished. So in conclusion, kind of looking forward, the first stage of implementation of all three of these fuel management prescriptions will occur on the Mount Suhalem treatment area, and that's proposed for 2022. And that's the immediate priority. And what that means is we don't actually have a timeline for Mount Richards, but it won't be in 2022. And they'll probably be implemented in maybe the following year, but more likely in the next several years. The remaining wildfire mitigation projects we've been working on throughout the municipality are ongoing. I encourage you, if you have more detail, to go back to our northcowichan.ca/wildfire website and click on some of the other tabs and maybe watch some of the other recorded presentations. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out through the website. There is contact information, and we are happy to answer any questions. And if we don't have the answers, we can direct you to the appropriate person who can answer. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope it was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more details, I do encourage you to go to northcowichan.ca/wildfire, and you will find a host of resources for this work and then wildfire just in general. Thank you so much.